All right, and it's noon exactly, so we'll get started. Um, Hi, my name is Dalina Perlomo Alvarez. I'm Curatorial Fellow for Diversity in the Arts at the Museum of Contemporary Photography, and welcome to Behind the Lens. This is a series we've been doing basically, well, since lockdown, where we invite photographers, and in this case, video artists too, to give us a sort of virtual sneak peek into their studio. Of course, studio can mean many things. In this case, Natalia's studio is in Puerto Rico right now. So we are here with artist Natalia Lassalle-Morillo, who is exhibiting in the exhibition Temporal that I have curated, and it's up now at the MoCP until September 19th. If you're in Chicago, you can make a reservation to go visit it in person. Just go to our website to make a free reservation. And so a little bit about Natalia. She's from Río Piedras, Puerto Rico, theater maker, filmmaker, visual artist, performer, and educator. Her work melds documentary, fiction, and performance in order to decentralize traditional canonical narratives and reimagine our perspective on individual and collective histories. She earned a BFA in drama from the Experimental Theater Wing at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts and an MFA in directing from CalArts School of Theatre. She is currently based between Los Angeles, California, and Bayamón, Puerto Rico. And in this case, she's in Puerto Rico right now. So she will be showing us, talking a little bit about her work, La Ruta, that is currently in the exhibition Temporal. But mostly she will be talking about new work, other work that she's been working on even now in Puerto Rico. So yeah, we'll get started. I'll let Natalia take over.
Hello. Okay, I'm gonna share screen.
Oh, and one more. If you have questions, feel free to ask questions. That's not to forget.
Sure. Okay, share computer sound. Okay, thank you, Dalina. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Marissa.
I'll fade it to the background now.
Everybody who has made this possible. And yeah, thank you everybody for taking an hour of your time to see and talk and learn more about what I'm doing and thinking. Like Dalina said, my name is Natalia Lassalle-Morillo. And even though I'm not a photographer and I do make images, I'm a theater maker, performer, performance director, filmmaker, installation maker. And like Dalina said, a lot of my work focuses sort of in the melding of forms and the melding of mediums. So I'm very much interested in the intersection between performance and film and liveness and permanence within form. But I'm also interested in, in the convergence of fiction, nonfiction, documentary, and embodied performance as a means to disorient the way that we perceive narrative and history and truth, also as a means to construct a new sense of truth or a new sense of what we think history is. I think a lot of my work, even though it's not about Puerto Rico, it is defined by me being born in Puerto Rico, and it's really an attempt to understand my experience as a person who navigates in betweens, as a person who grew up in Bayamón, but really started questioning and understanding Puerto Rican history after I left Puerto Rico when I was 17 years old. So I think at this moment with my work, the questions that I'm asking have mostly to do with who tells history and what is history. And when you grow up in a place where you're used to the fact that the government is not taking care of you and the history that you learn is quite skewed, then what is truth? Within my work, I collaborate a lot with non-actors and non-artists because I am interested in bringing those perspectives into this questioning of what is truth and what is history. And like Dalina mentioned today, I'm gonna be mostly screen sharing a lot of stuff. I'm gonna be screen sharing and screening a lot of my films. And feel free to ask any questions as they come up. And I'm sure that if we don't answer them now, we'll answer them at the end. Okay. So I think even though a lot of the work that I do is focused in filmmaking and documentary making, I want to start this conversation speaking about my work in theater and performance, because that is where a lot of my artistic and aesthetic and also interests began. I studied acting for many years. I did an undergrad in acting and performance, and I think for me, theater really is the mother of art forms. You know, it's one of the oldest forms that we have in order to express feeling and express our consciousness and our history. But it also is a practice of communion and ritual and collective understanding. So even as I started working more in documentary or film, I started thinking of film and of making image as a performative act. And I'm also always questioning performativity in filmmaking and image making. And even, you know, as a way of melding these two forms, I think the most important thing that I've learned from making theater is this collaborative process of being in a room with people and having to make compromises because of other people, but also, you know, that this form of making liveness, because for me, liveness is extremely radical because it is so fragile, and especially in these times where we're spending so much time on the computer, I think it's a big time to question liveness. But also because this form really asks you to be in service of something that's higher than you, something that's greater than you. And that is something that I like to think about when I'm also making films and working with my collaborators in creating film works. And, you know, as I came from theater and started working in performance and performing myself, I started becoming a bit dissatisfied with that world and started working within documentary and within photography as well, but mostly because of my interest in going deeper in truth and going deeper, you know, in the stories that surrounded me. And I think at this moment in my practice, I'm still actively trying to figure out the intersection between these two, you know, an intersection between how performance and theatricality and narrative and fiction exist within the filmmaking experience, also within the experience of spectating film. So how does the context, both political, social, geopolitical, I want to say too, just the context that surrounds the space that the film is being presented can also be become part of that conversation. And then in live performance, how do you experience permanence? And how do you intersect performance with reality? And I think also a lot of my work even began inspired by the work of Natalia Lassalle and her idea of potential history, which is really a way of thinking about history, taking in consideration who we are in the telling or the capturing of images when we're in a world where constant violence becomes an image as well. So that is something that also intervenes with a lot of what I'm doing. But to start, I'm gonna take us back 5 years, and I'm gonna start with a work that took me 6 years to make, and it's called Retiro. And Retiro was a work that began in late 2014, 2015, and it's a piece that I started making in collaboration with my mother. The work began not as a project or not as a creative endeavor. I decided to move back to my mother's house after her mother died. And I think I was living in Germany at the time, and I had this huge urge to just return to my mother, mainly because I started feeling empathy because of the fact that she had lost her origin, and it made sense for me to be there. And when I moved back into her house, I started thinking of her experience and decided to start interviewing her as a means for us to really start getting along, because, you know, I think we all have an experience of returning home and going back home and going back to that root and feeling chaotic. So I think in a way it was a means for us to communicate. And in that process of interviews and her giving me her perspective, not only on her current situation of grief, but also on her body and her experience being a woman who grew up on this island, I decided to collaborate with her in writing a script about a memory of her life. And the whole idea behind the script was mainly for us to work together, but also to give her an opportunity to realign her relationship to her past. So everything goes on the script. I told her, forget about the truth, you know, really focus on how you wish to remember this moment. And I gave her total control over the artistic direction, the style of the film, and casting as well. So we had a whole production set and pretty much tried to make this film happen. But in that process, we were looking for somebody to perform her, and she decided to cast me in the film, which was not part of my plan, but in a way I sort of surrendered to that idea. So it really transformed into another project that is more about her attempt of making, our attempt of making this film that is a memory of her life. But also, since it took 5 years to make, there's a history that is happening peripherally on the island, which is, you know, if I were to pinpoint a couple of the phenomena, you know, it was the Promesa bill into, you know, 2016, then it was Hurricane Maria in 2017. She also was getting surgery and going through some other personal situations. And then in 2019, we had Ricky Renuncia. So in a way, it tracks that whole peripheral history, and it really became an attempt for both of us to shift our perspective on our own family's history and accumulated trauma also just in relationship to this place. And I'm gonna screen and share, because I think it's best if you watch a little bit of it. So I'm gonna screen I think a little bit of the beginning and a little bit of the end, or maybe just the beginning for the interest of time. And, you know, this film, as many of my other film works, is a multi-channel film work. And that means that I work with 3 video channels. So it's 3 images that are happening simultaneously, that are going on at the same time. And I think my interest in that is really to consider the convergence of all of these perspectives that are manifesting. And in the case of this film, it's really, well, my mother's attempt to direct this film. It is the film itself, and then the peripheral history that's surrounded that I mentioned earlier. So I'm just gonna screen a little bit of this.
¿Qué tipo de película tú querías hacer?
Una película sencilla. Pues una historia que fue trascendental porque ocurrió y me desvió de lo que yo tenía, el imaginario que yo tenía de lo que iba a ser mi vida cuando yo fuera grande.
Y en cuanto a castearme a mí, ¿cuál fue la decisión detrás de eso?
Bueno, porque eres la actriz que puede mejor desempeñarme en términos de apariencia física y en términos de que tienes cualidades, ¿no? Que son un reflejo de lo que yo soy. Por ejemplo, una de las cosas que yo he descubierto en mi proceso de vida es que me estoy convirtiendo en mi madre. Esa es la muerte, según Platón, y en ella se basa la vida. Pero en realidad, el alma no muere.
¿Cómo tú terminarías esta película?
Terminaría esa película cuando ella rompe el traje de novia, hace un cojín para el perro y luego coge la tarjeta que le dejó su papá, ya decidida de que tiene que romper emocional y legalmente su matrimonio para poder renacer y comenzar una nueva vida.
Okay. Lo tenemos que volver a hacer y tengo que cerrar la ventana porque los coquilles ya están cantando.
Esos son los coquíes. ¿Esos no son lagartijos?
No, son coquilles. ¿Cómo te estás convirtiendo en tu madre?
Me estoy convirtiendo en mi madre.
¿Por qué?
Porque me miro reflejada en el espejo y pienso en ella. La veo a ella. Tanto en el aspecto físico como en el aspecto emocional. Y si no pongo de mi parte, me voy a convertir totalmente en ella. A pesar de que ella tuvo una crianza, yo tuve otra. Yo tuve unos privilegios que ella nunca tuvo, que son parte de los cambios socioeconómicos de este país en el siglo XX. Sabe, ella se crió en una pobreza extrema y yo crecí en una vida que tenía lo que necesitaba para vivir.
¿Y a ti te da miedo convertirte en tu madre?
No es miedo, no es miedo. Es que no me gustaría convertirme en una persona que solamente depende de otros para ser feliz, sino buscar la felicidad dentro de mí misma, haciendo las cosas que a mí me gustan. Que después que he tenido la capacidad en la vida de tropezar y levantarme, llegue un punto de que de que ya no pueda levantarme más.
Y cuando tú trajiste lo de que no quería, de que yo era la persona más indicada para hacer ese rol y que te diste cuenta que tú te parecías mucho más a tu madre, ¿tiene algo que ver conmigo eso, ese comentario?
Bueno, porque eventualmente tú te pareces a mí. Lo único que tú eres un alma más libre. No estás sujeta a los convencionalismos, como estaba yo. Porque a mí las monjas me metieron muchas cosas en la cabeza y los sacerdotes. La religión me metió muchas cosas en la cabeza, donde todo era malo, todo era pecado. Pero por el aspecto físico, ¿verdad? De que te pareces tanto a cuando yo era joven, más o menos la misma cara, el mismo cuerpo. Yo siempre le dije a mi hija, que eres tú, que no dejara por nada ni nadie su sueño. ¿Por qué? Porque yo dejé los míos. Y no quiero que se repita la historia. Porque una de las cosas que sucede mucho es que se repiten las historias. No quiero que se repitan las historias. Cada cual tiene que hacer su propia historia de su vida.
Todas esas cosas yo las dije sin pensarlas, sin libreto y sin nada. Ya, se acabó, ¿verdad? Pero no hice bien. Se van apagando los costillas.
¿Tienes calor?
Sí, hace calor.
So yeah, those were some excerpts of the film. And like many of my other works, it's not the case with La Ruta, but it is the case with Retiro and Conversations on Tragedy, which is a work that I'm currently developing. There is a theatrical or a live manifestation of the film, and these are just some images of a performance in 2017, which attempted to translate this film I made with my mother to a live form, and my mother couldn't be there, so I ended up casting 3 women that lived in Miami, who I ended up collaborating with in other films. One of them being Albis, which I made a film called Olguín Hialeah about her journey as a new immigrant to the United States at age 81. But in this whole theatrical project of Retiro, a lot of what I was interested in was having these women embody my mother's story. And that is still a project that I would love to, that I am interested in performing with my mother once COVID is past. I'm gonna jump a little bit ahead just for the interest of time. And I'm going to actually skip Olguín Hialeah and take you directly to La Ruta, which is the project that is being presented right now at the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago as part of Temporal. La Ruta is a collaborative project that I made with photographers Christopher Gregory and Erika Rodriguez, who are also part of the exhibition and who has spoken in Behind the Lens in the last 2 weeks. And La Ruta really is more than anything for me a road trip that we decided to take with a lot of questions in the back of our head as we were transversing the panoramic route. So La Ruta visually traces the infrastructure of the panoramic route The panoramic route was the brainchild of Luis Muñoz Marín, who was the first elected governor and who was the governor who established the ELA, the Estado Libre Asociado in Puerto Rico. But this route intended to provide a concept of progress to the island. It was supposed to mirror, there's like an idea, like a fantasy Route 66 on the island, which could be a route that tourists could take, but also locals could take in order to vacation. The whole project that was implemented also included recreational infrastructure and programs for these communities as an attempt to modernize the island after the ELA was established. Its initial budget of this route was supposed to be $4 million, and it ended up costing $20 million. So, you know, in this project that is a collaborative work between Chris, Erika, and I, we all took on different projects within this larger scheme. Erika was doing Polaroid photos, and she ended up creating these postcards of different locations throughout the route. And Chris did these large format prints of people that we met throughout the route, but also of the infrastructure that we encountered and the landscape. And my focus was creating this film that is part of the exhibit, which for me focused much more on, I would say, three things, which were the people that live in these areas and what their perspective is of this road, but also what their idea of progress is in relationship to the political and social situation of the island, but also to really stop and observe the route. A lot of people go through the route, but don't stop. So the film really involves the conversations, long takes of the scenery, and also these interviews. So I'm going to show you a little excerpt of the film. These are images, so you have an idea. It's also a 3-channel piece, similar to Retiro. And the work that is presented at the museum is a collaboration with a Hungarian textile maker who lives in Puerto Rico. And these curtains were made out of abaca, which is banana fiber, and pineapple fiber. And the installation itself also includes a hammock to give, you know, going back to what I said in the beginning, how is the film experienced? And you know, this film was presented in a museum, so it was a lot of how to think about the location where it was filmed and bring that into the space and into the viewing experience for the spectator. So I'm gonna play an excerpt of the film.
Cuando no hay béisbol, es un homogeneo mismo. No hay para dónde ir porque no tiene mucho movimiento. Bueno, hoy hay una, no te debes ir porque tú vas a tomar fotos. Nosotros salimos, damos vueltas y vamos a la playa y todo. Porque aquí no, el problema es que aquí no hay mucha variedad para distraerse. Ya si voy para Cagua o si voy para Guayama o para Salinas, la cogemos, porque tan bonita esa como la 14 que te lleva ahí bonito, o la de Salinas que pasa por las tetas de Calle, así que se llama, pero por la carretera vieja, eso es una belleza. Ese peñón grande subiendo así, tú no lo ves, la cámara no lo capta, porque como queda tan cerca, no te da perspectiva. Y es impresionante. Really, really, really awesome.
Ellos están con un letrero, déjame orar por ti. Entonces pasan y saludan. Si tú quieres orar por mí, aunque no estés, ¿cómo se dice? No se puede orar. Échame la bendición o saluda.
Oído, tú has estado en Estados Unidos en feria.
Pero
Lo que pasa es que eso no lo decide
eso es engañar al pueblo. Una promesa que no se puede cumplir.
Engañar el pueblo es el Estado libre asociado, que ni es Estado, ni es libre, ni es asociado.
Estado
es una vulgar
o-
colonia.
o-
Y las colonias son ofensivas, contra naturaleza, antihumanas, ofensivas, criminales, indignas.
Encantado. Nos vemos allá, Cecilia. ¿Tú vas allá abajo?
No, yo no voy para allá, no me gusta las actividades.
Para que con una bolita.
Y a esta altura, guau, yo con qué. Una niña, ¿no? Pero si yo estoy enamorado de una muchacha, yo tengo que decirle, mira, yo estoy enamorado de ti, ¿quieres ser mi novia? Ella me va a decir, te felicito por tu buen gusto, pero no. Ustedes así dicen ustedes, ¿verdad? Pero no, pues entonces yo resolví. ¿Ven? El problema es que estamos sin pedirla. Y queda la duda, la incertidumbre, los populares diciendo que no se la van a dar. Si tú no tienes que pensar por los americanos pueden pensar por ellos mismos. Pero pídela, tú pide la estabilidad. No te digan que no, ahí resuelve. ¿A dónde vas? Si vas a seguir siendo una colonia vergonzosa, asquerosa, o te refugias en el nivel de la dignidad del ser humano, que es tú ser el dueño de tu destino. Esto no es complicado. Pues lo que tiene que ser, el problema con la estabilidad, yo soy independentista, pero le guste uno o no le guste, es decisión de los americanos. Alguien tiene que decir, mira, yo quiero que Puerto Rico sea un estado. ¿Ustedes no dan la estabilidad? No. Ah, pues se acabó. Vámonos. ¿No? Pero que la pidan. Yo creo que la deben pedir.
That don't really have to do with this, but have to do with this, I'm gonna be talking about or showing you. Dime?
I think we can't hear you.
Oh no! Can you hear me now?
A little better. Yeah. Oh,
Better?
there.
yeah.
There it's not.
Okay, I'll just move forward because I think maybe with the video and me speaking at the same time, it becomes a bit complicated. But I'll leave it here. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about the two projects that I'm working on right now, which is a bit of a departure from La Ruta and Retiro. And I think have to do with what is in my mind right now. I think after studying, I spent the past 3 years studying directing and studying theater. And I think before going through this process of incubation and studying and thinking about directing so much, I used to think of directing as a form of of developing structures and developing systems. And I don't know if that has to do with the fact that I went to military school for 10 years or something else, but I kept thinking about the need to develop a system. And in studying theater and working with so many collaborators in one space, I started realizing that it's not that much about what I'm doing, but what I'm allowing to exist and what I'm seeing, and how I listen deeply and how I observe. It's a lot about being present in the act of making. And I started realizing that it's much more about observing the phenomena that is taking place and moving that phenomena as opposed to doing something. And I wanted to share one quote that I think when I read it, I thought, oh wow, this makes sense with what I'm feeling, which I found in Maya Deren's book, The Divine Horseman. It's a book that she wrote about her experience traveling to Haiti, but it really is a film of her attempt trying to make a film about Haitian voodoo practices, arriving at Haiti with all of this equipment and all of these ideas and this film that she had written in her mind, and then encountering the voodoo system as one that she could not capture on film and that she could not contain. And she actually ended up visiting and revisiting Haiti and staying in Haiti. And the book really is a very thorough, descriptive, but also experiential document about Haitian voodoo as a system, as a spiritual system that can compare to the way that we see Greek mythology or understand Greek mythology. It's a really amazing book. But I'm just going to share this quote in order to introduce myself into these two works. But what the quote goes, I began as an artist, as someone who would manipulate the elements of a reality into a work of art in the image of my creative integrity. And I ended up by recording as humbly and accurately as I can the logics, I want to say the metaphysical experience of a reality, which has forced me to recognize its integrity and abandon my own manipulations. So that being said, let me take you into two projects that after being in Puerto Rico for a month and a half, I've realized that they might be part of the same project, that they're not separate. But one of them is this project, film work called Paro Tríptico. And this is really an accidental film, I want to say, because it is a film that filming, of being present in the protests of 2019 in Puerto Rico, the Ricky Renuncia protests. And I was really struggling with documenting and filming. I went with my camera and with my microphone, and it was impossible for me to shoot it because there were so many things going on at the same time. Let me see if I can play it. But pretty much, I wasn't at a moment and decided not to film. And then I accidentally one day left my camera on and started accumulating all of this information because it was images, it was sound, it was simultaneous experience, it was the kitty in life. Like I bumped into friends all the time, and try not to get tear gassed, and I'm tear gassed in this footage. So it's a really complicated set of information that I'm still trying to navigate and trying to understand how that exists and how that is translated into a film, because I'm really not interested in the success or failure of the protest. I'm not interested in in furthering the, the images that are constantly created about protests at a time sometimes romanticize the experience. I'm more interested in how to encompass this, as I mentioned earlier, the Dionysian experience that takes place in a protest. It's not only about the urge and the need of a group of people that have a line to go and do this collective action, but it really involves grief. If it wasn't for the hurricane, these protests wouldn't have happened, and it was really a celebration of grief. And how do all of these things exist at the same time? So this is something that I'm currently working on, and I've attempted. I've had several attempts in trying to put on. But like I said, it might be part of this other project. And with this, I will finish the talk.
Oh, sorry. It's hard to hear you again. I think if you just turn off, I think you can leave the video on, but just turn off the volume.
Okay. What about now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think the video and me talking at the same time becomes a complicated action.
I think you can leave the image, but maybe just turn down the volume if you want the video playing on you.
Okay. I mean, we're almost done.
Okay.
So
fade into the background again.
Thank you, Alina. But that project, I'm understanding, and I'm explaining myself to you as I'm trying to understand, I think is a part of this other project that is a long-term project that I've been working on for 3 years, which has the working title Conversations on Tragedy, or En Parabola. And this is a film and performance project that attempts to adapt and contextualize Greek texts to the current social and political experience of Puerto Rico and the diaspora. So the film and the project really utilizes the structure of the Greek tragedy and attempts to adapt it with a cast of Puerto Ricans that are from the island and Puerto Ricans that live in different communities in the United States, which is, for me, I'm working particularly with New York, Buffalo, Chicago, and Orlando. Orlando being a fascinating diaspora because of all the different levels of arrival of the diaspora. But I mean, the reason why I'm working with the tragedy as a form is because people assume the Greek tragedy is the most traditional thing, but it really is not. It is really time and logic in the system of the Greek tragedy is not conventional. Everything's happening at the same time. And after I came back to Puerto Rico after the hurricane, I started understanding what was happening as somebody who didn't experience the hurricane while reading Greek tragedies and understanding the connections and seeing all these connections. And Greek tragedies initially were this forum that was established in order to convene, to bring together those people who had left to go to war and the people that had stayed in the city-state to convene and experience a sense of catharsis together, and then have a Dionysian fast and have a collective understanding of the consciousness of the town after a catastrophe. So I've been thinking a lot about that in the context of Puerto Rico as a place who is dealing with an accumulation of tragedy, an accumulation of phenomena. And I say, if I were to track back the last 6 years, we have the Promesa bill, we have the economic crisis, we have Hurricane Maria, we have the government and dealing with the political system, we have Ricky Renuncia, we have the earthquakes, we have everything that has happened with the suministros and all of the spectacles that take place on a daily basis. So it's like, my question with this film is really what is the new consciousness that is developing? And like, what is the spiritual system, or what is the metaphysical system, or what is the system that we can't rationalize that exists among everybody that calls Puerto Rico their home? And I'm including the diaspora in that question because I'm interested in and the convergence of all these different ways of experiencing the island, and how all of these experiences are valid, and how I know that if it weren't, like, the diaspora has taken a big part in the reconstruction of the country after Hurricane Maria. And there were parallel protests that were taking place last year to the protests here. So it's really opening up that question and allowing there to be no answer. Just attempting to find a communal ground within all of these people. And then giving them the opportunity to understand this text and change it in whichever way they want, or mostly redirect it to their own relationship of the island. And I worked on this piece. I've been working on it for 3 years, and I did a first draft with my mom because she is always down to work with me. And she will be part of the film, final film. But right now it's still a work in progress because of COVID, but also because I have a lot to shoot. So it's not only going to be my mom, but hopefully a cast from all of these different communities. So yeah, I think, Dalina, for me, that is it, because I know we're on time. I can continue, but I also want to open up and converse and see if there's anybody who has questions, or if you have questions. And
yeah, we can make this for the last 15 minutes. It can be a conversation. If people have questions, feel free to type it into the chat. We do have a comment. Someone says, "Estamos aquí con cariño desde República Dominicana."
Who's that?
What?
I couldn't hear you, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay, let me see. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I'm speaking in Spanish, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so the comment is in Spanish. It says, "Estamos aquí con cariño desde República Dominicana, aprendiendo de la Yariri Nati." Someone named Julia.
Julia. How are you?
So yeah, someone's just saying hi from the Dominican Republic for people who speak Spanish. So yeah, if anyone has questions, someone on Facebook said hi from Peru and hi from Ireland. So those are the comments. We have people watching us everywhere except Chicago and Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
So yeah, feel free to type in questions in the chat if you have questions for Natalia. To start off, I think one part in the video where we couldn't hear you very well is that you were explaining something. I kind of knew what you said because I know a little bit about the video, but when you were talking about Paro, I think you were talking about how the camera, you didn't intend to have your camera on, and then it kind of turned on, and then you just kind of let it happen, and then you also got tear gas after that, and so you were actually running from the tear gas. I think that was the part where we couldn't hear you. So if you could go back to that, that would be great.
Yeah. I mean, what I was, let me return in my head. I think what I was trying to say is that, at that point in time, I was really struggling with documenting the protest, and I gave up because I just wanted to be present. And I realized that it was quite difficult to not do what the media was doing, which is take these images, and I think when I'm working in Puerto Rico, I'm always thinking about how the image that I'm making is read and perceived and understood in the United States and elsewhere. So I gave up, and then the camera turned on. The camera one night, I accidentally left it on, and it just received all this information. And like I said, it was images, but it was also sound. It was conversations that I was having with the people that were with me. There's people that I encountered as we were trying to pass Plaza de Armas to get away from the police. And then when I encountered the material, I was really thinking of how to work with this material and how to make something with this material. Because I was not interested in making a documentary or a conventional documentary about the protests, but nor thinking about the failure of the success of the protest, but attempting to document attempting to capture the experience of the protest, which is this chaotic Dionysian experience where everything's happening at the same time, and how the protests for me, experiencing them as a body in the space, the protests were also an experience of grief and an experience of people coming together after the hurricane and deciding that it was enough. So my interest with the piece as it stands is how do you recreate that experience as a person for the spectator who's walking into the installation space. Mm-hmm.
We have 3 questions. So the first one is, do you think there are 2 Puerto Ricos? One that is the viewpoint from the locals living in Puerto Rico, and another from those that live in the mainland in the US, but have family living in Puerto Rico?
I mean, I think for me, it's not about, like, I actually had a conversation yesterday that had to do, I've been talking to several Puerto Ricans who were not born in Puerto Rico, who are Rio Rican, and I've been asking these questions to them, like, what is your relationship to this place? And I think there's not one, I think there's plenty, I think there's many, and it's not about what it means to be Puerto Rican, but it's really a lot about, for me, as I'm questioning, it's about what you can't rationalize as you try to make a connection to the territory or to the land. So I think there's many different Puerto Ricos, you know, it's many different experiences that even me being a person who is constantly leaving and coming back, like I'm here, but in 2 weeks I'm not gonna be here, and I'm experiencing Puerto Rico from the distance, and that gives me a different relationship to the island. So I think we all have a relationship to the home, to the territory that is constantly changing, that is constantly moving, especially because in Puerto Rico, there's something happening every day. And there's, you know, just as there is many Puerto Ricos depending on our relationship, you know, if you were Puerto Rican who grew up in New York, I think your Puerto Rico is very different than a Puerto Rican who grew up in Minnesota and who never went to the island. But I do think all of those ideas are valid. All of those ideas of belonging or non-belonging or in-betweenness are extremely valid. That's my opinion. I think everybody can have a different way of seeing that.
Okay. So second question is, did the film you worked on with your mother, was it as much a project for her to heal as it was for you to heal in your relationship with her?
I mean, I think for me, I didn't know I was making a project with her when I started working with her. And my focus was mostly her. But it didn't occur to me until last year, because I finished this film during the protests. Literally during the protests, I would go in the morning, I would go during the night to protest, and in the morning I would be finishing editing and finishing the sound mix. It wasn't until I decided to pretty much rethink all the edits that I had done over 4 years and see all the footage and also include myself and also implicate myself, that I started realizing, oh, it's also an experience of me coming to terms with history and coming to terms with what I've inherited and coming to terms with the fact that the only way that this, you know, more than a project or a film, it's really something that I did for my mother and for me. And I think we're both different after that. But it didn't occur to me that I was also going through something making it until I understood that it was important for me to implicate myself. And the film changed a lot because I started including things that were embarrassing for me to include, like the fact that the way that I speak to my mother when I'm directing her is very different from the way that I speak to somebody else, and that I'm not nice all the time, and that there's all this tension that's there. So it became that for me, but I wouldn't say healing as much as I would say like we were transforming our relationship, because healing is lifelong and goes beyond life. I think it's more of a transformation for both of us.
Okay, we have two more questions. Julia, I'm interested in this connection you are making between Maya Deren's work and current PR cosmology collective consciousness. Could you expand a little more on this?
Sure. Hola, Julia. Me alegra mucho que estés aquí, Julia. So, I mean, it's. I think when I read Maya Deren's work regarding Haitian voodoo, I was really struck by a line in that book where she speaks about how the system, the spiritual system that was created in Haiti is really specific. And it's really profound, but it is based on the material circumstances of this place. It's not something that exists up here. It has really been emerged because of the fact that these people have endured and suffered so much, and went through revolution. And there's theories of, for a lot of, it's, what is belief? Everybody believes something different, but it is said that, it was through voodoo that the Haitian Revolution really happened. So I think I've been reading this book and thinking of what is a spiritual system. And the spiritual system for me is really not this, it's not about going beyond, it's really about being grounded and present. And a spiritual and a cosmology does not have to mirror the way that we view religion or understand religion. Like, it can actually be very mundane. It can be the metaphysics of the mundane. It's a question that I have, but I do think that with this accumulation of experiences and phenomena and tragedy that has happened in Puerto Rico, there's a new consciousness that has to be developing. And I don't know what that is. That's why I'm asking these questions. And I'm reading this book and just gathering more information about what that could be. A lot of questions.
I want to read that book.
It's amazing. Everybody should try to read it.
So our last question, and I think this is for sure the last question because we have about 4 more minutes. In your opinion, in that in-betweenness of the experience of home, what is the role of land and connection to land?
I mean, I think that this is also a question, like, I'm going to give my opinion. I think everybody has a different relationship to what in-betweenness means. I think in-betweenness can be experienced in many ways. For me, and I'm speaking from my visceral relationship, I think when I try to rationalize to other people, when I'm not in Puerto Rico, why I work so much in Puerto Rico and why it's so important for me to work and tell stories and make an archive of the history of this place, I always bring it back to the fact that when I'm here, there's a very visceral experience that happens to me that and maybe this is because I was an actor and I performed, so I'm always thinking about the body and how the body relates to a place. But for me, it's very visceral. It's like gravity sticker. It's harder for me to leave. And I think that's not an experience of Puerto Rico. I think that's an experience with whatever home means to anybody. But for me, beyond rational, it's really a physical experience where my body feels different. And then I start thinking differently, and I start seeing differently, and I start questioning things differently. And I then become a bit more careful of how I document and think and talk about this place. So for me, it's that, and then there's all the material information, like the political situation, and histories that we've inherited over time. But for me, it's really a lot about the fact that this is an island that exists in the Caribbean, that is a volcanic island, and that is in constant atmospheric and seismic, is that how you say it? Like, in constant threat of earthquakes, and that for me has a lot of information already and has to do with my connection. Even though I'm not here, even though I might be in California and I might be dealing with another reality, I'm always feeling this gravitational pull to this territory.
Yeah, and when we were planning this behind the lens, one thing that you mentioned to me is that you kind of preferred to do it while you were in Puerto Rico and in the mindset and the body of being in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And to have it in the background.
Okay. But even, I know we're done, but in terms of the in-betweenness, that I'm also aware that this experience of in-betweenness, people experience it while only living here, and people experience it while being a first generation or second generation. So it's an idea and an experience that extends beyond me being back and forth. I think everybody can relate to it in a different form, different way.
And speaking of that, the one last comment we had was Puerto Rico presente, so presente también. So so yeah, I guess we're done. Thank you all for joining Behind the Lens with Natalia Lassalle-Morillo. Remember that you can see her work at the Museum of Contemporary Photography if you're in Chicago. Also, we are recording this, so if you know someone who really wanted to watch it and missed it, we're gonna post it on our Vimeo page probably sometime next week. We post all our Behind the Lens recordings on the MoCP Vimeo page. You can also go back to the event page on the website, and once we have the recording, we'll have it embedded on there as well. And as well as Erika's and Chris's and other Behind the Lens. So yeah, remember Temporal, Puerto Rican Resistance is on view now at the MoCP up until September 19th by reservation. You can go to the website to make a reservation if you want to see in person. You can also go to our website and see other materials like the exhibition essay and the tour, the virtual tour in Spanish and English. There's 2 versions. So yeah, thank you for watching. Stay tuned for next week. We have a program with artist Ojos Nebulosos, who is also in Temporal. And the week after, we also have one with Ojos Nebulosos. So keep an eye on that because we're going to be posting more about that. So thank you all for joining, and thank you, Natalia.
Thank you for making time.
And it looks like we beat the Laura storm, so.
Yeah, I can hear it though. I see the gray skies right here. So.
Yeah, because we were worried like about power and stuff, but we made it. We did it. And people are saying thank you. Someone said that was amazing. Thanks. So I think, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. More thank you pouring in. Thank you all, and thank you, Natalia. And yeah, go to mocp.org for more. And adiós, nos vemos.